Joe Biden, Donald Trump. The debate just happened. What are your thoughts?
So I was actually surprised by the results of the debate. The main reason was because I believe Joe Biden, prior to the debate, Joe Biden's team created rules with CNN for the prompter and the time limits, and also the main one that I thought was the button to talk, which prevented anyone from interrupting, which I thought was going to hinder President Donald Trump, but it actually seemed to control him. And so I think that actually was a backfire towards President Biden, because there was only a couple of times where he kind of went off the rails, where you would have thought he would have outblasted or outed President Biden. On the reverse side, I think that kind of hurt President Joe Biden, because when the two people were muted, the cameras were strictly on him. And so when he froze or if he did something, it was really prominent. And you could see that Donald Trump was really reserved, because when he would freeze, Donald Trump would look over at him. And it seemed like that would be a perfect time for him to interrupt. But that's what I thought of it. There wasn't much substance in the debates, in the debate arguments, but I guess that's just what it is right now. But what were your thoughts?
Well, so I think that was one of the main takeaways. Was I do agree that did backfire, because it made Trump seem more presidential than normal, right? Because he couldn't interrupt, he couldn't jump out and say anything crazy during it. And then Biden's age showed a little harder, because when you just have someone up there with no interruptions, you could really see it. I also think the debate being late at night didn't help. Just as an age correlation, it was probably nap time for him overall. So and I don't even say that ironically. Like, he probably really, like, I bet when they prepped for the debates, it'd be interesting to know. I bet they prepped during the day. Like, he got a cup of coffee, got ready, and I don't know if he knew how he'd react so late. So yeah, definitely that format wasn't conducive. Also, another format issue was the moderators not jumping in, right? Kind of allows Trump to either embellish or kind of add details without getting questioned, which if you allow Trump the ability to kind of riff with no checks and balances, if you listen to the debate, it would sound like he single-handedly saved the world, and if you don't vote for him, the world is going to end. So I think a lot of factors that the Biden team miscalculated overall that made the debate in the public sentiment wise a little one-sided.
Yeah, there was a point in the debate where in the rules it says you're allowed a 1-minute rebuttal to the argument that the other person provided. And it was pretty funny. I caught it, and then I started seeing it across social media. There was a point where President Biden said something to an argument, and it was Donald Trump's turn to rebuttal what he said. And I don't know if you caught this, but the moderator started moving on to the next topic, and they muted Donald Trump. And the woman moderator, I can't remember her name right now, it's evading me, but she started signaling to the guy. She put her finger up. I don't know if you've seen that. She was putting her finger up, like trying to push it to the right so that he would see her and he wouldn't recognize Trump so he could have his minute. And I thought that would fluster President Donald Trump, but that didn't really happen. So it was actually interesting to see, because, CNN's posture on the political standpoint, where they are and how they favor, I thought that was interesting too, how they questioned the questions. But the one part that was very frustrating was they would ask a question and no one would answer the question.
Yeah. Now, but you brought up a couple good points, right? First and foremost, I think we've had a changing of the guards on who the networks actually want to win, right? Like, I think, like, common logic would be like, CNN, ABC, MSNBC, they would hate for Trump to win, right? That'd be what most people would think. But I think when you really break it down, these are just giant corporations, right? And if you're a corporation, your number one goal is to make as much money for your shareholders as possible, right? If you're a CEO, right, do you really just politically care if Biden wins? Possibly, right? But I don't think um, the rich section of America, right, the CEO section, skews as liberal as people think. And I think people also think that these mega corporations are all liberal at the top when they really aren't. So if I'm you know, a network head, if you honestly like had a drink with one of them and said like, who would you really like to win the election? Like honestly, I think they'd all say Trump, right? A lot more money to be made in 4 years of Trump, right? And the year after. So I do agree that there's the people who watch CNN are typically biased for Trump to win. I mean, for Biden to win. But I don't think the actual networks, and my evidence towards that is after the coverage ended, when all the kind of panelists were talking, they were like, "Oh, this is so bad for for uh for Biden. This was horrible, right?" Because they want that dialogue, right? If it's
Yeah.
that biased, they would just say, "Oh, I think it was a close debate. Nothing to see here." I think they were probably directed like, "Oh, this is going bad. Really, spin this up." So I think that's my hot take is I think CNN, MSNBC, and everybody really wants like the best thing for Fox News was Obama winning the presidency. You know what I'm
I'm
saying? Like that made a lot of people a lot of money.
normally I cut you off and I start rambling and talking, but I'm letting you dig your grave on this one because I'm going to hit you with some facts and you'll be like, oh, okay, that may make sense too. So go ahead.
Hit me with it. No, go ahead.
So I agree with some of what you said, but some of what you said is just I don't think it's very accurate because yes, I agree with there not being much political leaning at the top, and most of the time they just want to line their pockets or grow their business. But how do you do that if you're a entertainment type of news type of product? Is how you do that is by selling your product, which to your customer, and your customer is left leaning. But I do agree that in this debate, they were not as influential as I thought they would. I thought they would have had a bigger impact in the uh, debate than they did because they were left leaning. I thought they were going to support more Biden and try to give him softballs, but they kind of didn't, and it was kind of equal. And so I say all that because CNN seems to be at this point where they were at a point where everything was destroy Trump, which lost their credibility in news, if that makes sense, because their customer base wanted to see Trump destroyed and all these different things. And that's not to say they were trying to destroy him, but what they were trying to do was just cater to their customers so they can make more money. So those are the facts that I agree on. And I don't think the moderators had much of an influence as I thought. And this also goes to show that I believe that CNN may be at a point where they're starting to pivot or transition to trying to show the world, hey, we are a news organization again. And they're not just trying to cater to propaganda. So those were my thoughts about it. But you can go ahead and keep digging your grave again.
Well, no, we're really saying the same thing, right? Where you're like, hey, I think they were trying to be not as biased, right? You even hit on that at the beginning when you were talking about how that debate format wasn't really helpful for Biden, right? And then after the coverage, they went harder than anybody on talking about how like bad of Biden, how bad Biden's performance was. So I just think at the end of the day, I think presidential candidates do this. I think countries do this. I think companies do this, where they trick the public into making them think, oh, we really care about you all when they really care about money. Like CNN doesn't care about the common man. They like, oh, what gets the most ratings? Oh, talking about Trump gets the most ratings. Like when we look back to when he won the election the first time, right? He was getting a ton of news coverage. If they had kind of not put him on the platform and not talked about him, who knows if he wins, right? But when he's the front page every day, right? And Trump knows that, so he weaponizes it. So basically what I'm getting at is CNN and then pretty much any news agency is going to try to make money. They're going to put the stories out and push the narratives that make the most money, regardless of who wins. Because if you're really at the top, you don't really care about the people. And I think you can't think of CNN in a poor light but then also think, oh, they really care about their values. Like, no, they don't have any values. If they did have one, it'd just be getting money. So I think that leads to some why the coverage goes down, you know?
Yeah, I can get behind all that. And I think, yeah, you're accurate in saying that we were saying the same thing. I think many times we do say the same thing, but in different ways, and we go in circles around that. But let's go back to the presidential debate. And there was one point that President Donald Trump was asked a question, right? And he really did show his restraint in a lot of how he was talking, because before he would uh try to make it like a clickbait type of response in a short clip.
Mm-hmm.
And although there wasn't much substance in either of the two answers, he was well reserved in his responses and not trying to uh how do you say dehumanize
Mm-hmm.
President.
He didn't bully Biden in the ways that it was suspected he would try to.
Yeah, and I think that showed that also was a big impact, because this is like showing a transformation so that he can pool some of um that voter base that he may not have been able to get before, because he was the bully and that's just what they were turned off by. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
No, that is interesting. Now, overall, though, I think from the debate, I don't think either candidate gained new people, right? Like I think the Trump, most of his talking points were kind of around like, I was the best president ever, the military loved me, everybody loved me, he was the worst president ever, which is kind of on brand with what he does. He just toned it down a little bit. I think Biden tried to get his points across, but like you said, his age really came in. But no one that wasn't going to vote for Trump is like, you know what? I'm in there now, right? Like nothing. Or now, if you want to say, oh well, maybe a few less people would vote for Biden because of it, possible, right? But no, I don't think Trump didn't do anything stand out, like to stand out in the thing. And I
Yeah.
think most of the people voting for Biden, I think this is the big difference in the political parties right now. Democrats don't want Biden to be the president, but way more than that, they don't want Trump to be the president, right? So
Mm.
Biden performing poorly isn't really going to sway as many people as people believe like it would, simply because they weren't voting because they think Biden is so great. They were voting because of not wanting Trump in office. So I think that limits the total impact the debate was going to have. What do you think?
Yeah, let's go. Let's shift to one of the controversial topics and let's see how this goes.
Okay.
So the part about the Roe v. Wade. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Trump did a good job of answering these questions, because he explained why he got rid of Roe v. Wade. And I think it's challenging to say that he got rid of it, because he didn't do anything to get rid of it besides appoint the judges in place who were more right leaning to get rid of it, which in essence, he got rid of it, but he didn't get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the same goes for Biden. Like, the chances that Biden gets this thing put back in is virtually zero if he doesn't get another Supreme Court. So this is where this is a very important topic for the next president that no one's really tracking, is because there's one of the Supreme Court justices who's at the age where they may have to step down, or they may not make it past the next election. So that would mean that president would have another appointment. So that's a big impact. But that goes all to say, I don't think many of the Americans understand what Roe v. Wade means. And so in this whole part, I just go back to say Donald Trump, I think, did a good job of explaining that, but then also explaining that, hey, I have to cater towards my audience. And this may not be 100% what I believe, but I need votes. I don't know if you saw that part.
Oh, yeah. So to that point, right, I think this was the interesting part about that. Trump 100% got rid of Roe v. Wade, right? He elected the officials in that got rid of it. The whole point was to implement the laws that his party wanted to get through. But one interesting note, and I think background on this is why I recommend that book I was telling you. I told you about it before. Win Bigly, right? basically it was a book documenting uh, some of basically how Trump communicates, and then case studies almost of situations where his communication style can be used to influence all the way up to manipulate situations. And it's like a good read because you can implement some of those tactics in your daily life. It's like the art of the deal kind of thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one thing he did masterfully, right, is to get elected, let all his people know, hey, this is going to be something I'm trying to change. Roe v. Wade, I'm trying to get that out of here, right? Then, when he successfully does it by getting the judges in, kind of pull back a little bit, like, oh, I didn't get rid of it; they got rid of it. But I support their decision. It's the Supreme Court. Who am I to say when it's obviously he's been on record and that's been something he wants to do, right? And you could tell it's really a well done. It was good coaching from like with his team and kind of planning internally to kind of isolate himself from that. So that way, because what he doesn't want to do is he doesn't want a bunch of on the fence Democratic voters to associate him with getting rid of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, now that I've gained more Republican voters by implementing something they've been wanting to implement it for forever, right? Now I'm gonna kind of pretend like it wasn't my doing, and then when he gets elected, he could just say, well, I'm the president who got rid of Roe v. Wade. So I think it was really well done on his part to do that. And of all the issues, not Stormy Daniels, not the felonies. The most likely issue that would kind of is going to be difficult for Trump to overcome in the upcoming election is Roe v. Wade. That's like a lot of Republicans deal with that in their local elections, right? So I think it was a good game plan for him to try to start distancing himself from it. At least put those clips out there saying like, "Oh no, it wasn't involved. It wasn't me."
Mm-hmm. But this goes back to the point of I don't think many people know what Roe v. Wade actually does, because like if you're so for abortion, and I'm not saying I'm against it or for it, I'm just saying if you're so for abortion, in this stance, what that means is that your local elections mean more than the presidential election. So right now people should be going out and trying to elect people at the local system to support their beliefs, whether it's abortion or not abortion. And if does that make sense of what I'm trying to say?
Oh no, that makes perfect sense. However, one important thing to note is going to be that depending on how you view something, if you view something as a right, then you don't really view it as necessarily a state right, right? So let's say, for example, if the ability to vote, right? Let's say if a state somehow was able to pass something, we'll just find out they did some legalese, right? That said a certain, uh, ethnic group or gender couldn't vote in an election, right? And then they said, let's say the president at the time, we'll say it was Biden, said like, oh, well, I'm making that a state's right, right? Like the ability to vote, the states get to decide if people can do it or not. Then people would rightly be upset. So I think people do understand that now it's a state's issue, right? I think the issue is if people view something as a right, then it shouldn't. Then they don't view it as something that a state should be able to decide, right? So I think most people. I'm not going to say most because there's always a range. I think a good amount of people in arms about it understand. They just wanted it as a protected right, and I think, in all
That makes
honesty, this is
No,
yeah.
I've never thought about it in that way. So I guess what you're saying, and that's the way I've missed it, is something that's just an inalienable right, like your right to vote as being,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Your
Yeah.
right to vote is a right that should be held at the federal level because it's a universal thing that
Hmm.
everyone should have. Now, where that pushback comes is the reason is there's separation in some of the rights that are reserved for the federal and the states. And one of those is health, because the reason this is set up this way, if many people don't know, is because across the United States, it's such a big country that you could be in Florida and you could have a certain system of health, the same
Hmm.
type of diseases that are going around. And you could also like the diseases and, genetics, all these different things that are impacting you at that local level could be so different than how Hawaii is being impacted
Hmm.
because of how far they are, the genetics, all these different things. This is why medical decisions are pushed down to the states. And then, and I get that. So I've never thought about it in that way. So you actually made me think about, changing my view on that in the sense. But then, maybe there could be a system of marking it to say, hey, this health remains a state right, but this abortion is a universal right. So that gets pulled up to the federal level, but everything, because I think the challenge comes into play is people, be it politicians and other people who are into the political stream, are afraid of government overreach. So if you
Mhm.
start giving up little by little, then now the federal government has too much power. So this is that checks and balance of it. So I'm gonna stop talking there and give you some thoughts. But you did make me think a little bit in that, and maybe change my view on it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that is interesting. And I think, in all honesty, I think most people would agree with this. Trump doesn't really care about abortion on a personal level. Like, he doesn't care about that. I don't think that's a deep drive and passionate issue of his. And I think being able to make that a state's issue is really for his constituency that doesn't want abortions to be legal at all. Like, I think the people who are anti-abortion aren't like, oh, I want it to be a state's right. They don't want it to exist. And the closest Trump was able to do was, hey, I can make it states' right, which is a big, win for his base. And I think the people who want it to be just a right of every citizen don't want it to be a state's right. They want it to be a human right. So yeah, so I think 100%. It all depends on which side someone falls on it, and then do you believe that a state should be able to decide it, or do you believe everyone should be able to do it? No, yeah. So overall, but like I said, that's a big. It really consolidated a lot of his base, and it really galvanized a lot of the Democratic base. So that's going to be a key, like, touchstone issue for the election.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this before, and I think majority of people don't think abortion is necessarily a bad thing. I think even when you look at the political spectrum of all of the United States, most people are probably in that middle ground where
Mm-hmm.
they're like, okay, abortion is good, but I think the argument more isn't abortion, but it's more, when is life, and when can you not do an abortion, and when can you? But that's not this podcast. We were just talking through the debate.
Yeah, I'm about to say it can go really, really far.
Yeah.
Now,
To that,
no. Hmm.
Donald Trump did mention that, and so then he did talk about, it's not about whether we should do an abortion or not. It's more about, when does an abortion start? So that's the challenge that they have to move forward with. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Yeah, and I think what happens is the kind of liberal argument for it gets kind of straw manned, right? Where it's like, oh, they all want to like abort babies after the babies are born, right? And I've never met a person that
Never.
said like, I just want to kill the baby after it's born. But I think that fear, when you were talking about it, it made me think about this. Where I think the fear of like the mom in like Minnesota is that her kid gets, what I'm saying? Like, the thought, if you believe that that is a living actual human being like taken out, right? That person is like, I don't want that ever happening. And and most of those people don't even want to think of a situation where it would happen. So they don't really want to get into like the 3 months versus 6 months. Like, they'd rather, no, it just doesn't, I don't have to think about it. And, like that. So
Mhm.
yeah, super interesting issue. But like you said, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. So now, even the bigger controversial topic. You ready for this one?
Go for it.
Donald Trump or Joe Biden, who wins in a golf tournament?
Oh, Trump. Oh, Trump's dominating. Don't like what
Did
most
you see the
people.
marketing about the golf?
Well, what they say.
So at the
Oh, you talking about
end,
when he said like the 50-yard thing?
yeah. So at the
Yeah,
end, the CNN host. So just real quick, the moderators were Jake Taper
Jake Tapper. Yeah.
and Dana Bash. But when they asked the question, are you, I think it was to Donald Trump, which is really ironic because Donald Trump doesn't, he's, when you look at him, his command presence shows younger than what he is.
Mm-hmm.
Biden, on the other hand, shows older. But they asked the question to Donald Trump. I think I don't know how old is he. Let's see how old Donald Trump is.
I think they're within like 3 years of each other or something.
So Donald Trump is 78. And let's see how old Joe Biden is. 81. So they're pretty close to the age.
Yeah.
But so they asked Donald Trump, how fit was he to be the president of the United States? And, he explained, I've taken 2 cognitive tests and I'm very fit. I've lost some weight. And then when it was Biden's turn, he like started attacking Trump. One of the comments that Trump said is, I just won a tournament. He had a golf tournament he won. And so he was explaining, to win a golf tournament, you have to be pretty smart in your head and pretty fit in your body. I don't know how accurate that is. But when it went to Joe Biden, he was like, well, I think I could beat you in a golf tournament. Only if you carry your own bags is what Joe Biden said.
Mm-hmm.
He also mentioned that he has a 6 handicap. You know what that means?
Negative. I know about, like, I watched, like, was it the last golf tournament, I think, with Scotty, not the one Scotty Scheffler won, the one before that with the kind of buff guy won, but I always forget the scoring, so, let me know.
All right, so basically a 6 handicap, let's see what it is. 6 handicap would mean Biden is better than most amateur golfers because he'd shoot around the low 80s to high 70s, which is generally a solid score. So basically, like, you're giving yourself a handicap. He's basically saying he's at the physical stature of an amateur golfer.
Okay.
And so, but it's, it's pretty, it was towards the end. So what led me to see was, as the debates finish, Donald Trump walked off with very strong command presence and just walked off. And Joe Biden, on the other hand, I don't know why they took him down the stairs right in the front, and he couldn't walk down the stairs. His wife had to come and help him down the stairs. And so, you can't walk down the stairs, but you can score that high in golf. I don't know if that's a very accurate statement.
But you know what's funny to your statement? Have you ever seen the show Billions?
I have not.
So I'll say it was like maybe in season 4, right? There was like the bad guy of the season, right? And at the end, he was talking to one of the main characters, and he was like, "Hey, we don't watch the same news, right?" Like, and his whole point behind that statement was to say, like, "Hey, like, this story might come out this way to your base, but to my base, it'll come out different, right?" Because I was on Reddit. Reddit leans pretty liberal, and it showed a picture of Trump walking off by himself, and then Biden holding like his wife's hand in the exact opposite way, right? So you see how like one narrative of it is Biden's so old he needs his wife to walk him off the stage, like you can't golf, and then a liberal media outlet is just putting out, hey, look at Biden over here holding his wife's hand, that's sweet. Look at Trump walking out by himself, right? So it's just really interesting. First, to answer your original point, yeah, obviously Biden's not doing anything physical. He's just surviving. But secondarily, it's interesting how different outlets are going to swing it, right? Because Reddit is more like human and AI driven combined, right? People post what's interesting and the algorithm picks it up, as opposed to news, which kind of decides what it thinks is going to long term be viable. It still has that heavily human element to it, right? So it's interesting to see how that base of young, like Reddit probably skews a little younger, relatively young liberals views it, right? Versus how the news is going to pick it up. Or let's say like Facebook or LinkedIn would pick it up, So I don't know, that's really interesting.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about President Donald Trump getting or swinging the black voters in his way? They mentioned it in debates. And I think after this, we'll move into AI, into debates, how it's going to affect it. And then we can talk through the other podcasts we did where the AI predicted the winners.
So as the foremost expert on like, how like they do that on it'll be on like Fox, and Fox will bring like one black dude on, and then he'll be like, I'm telling you, Trump is the president. Like, Trump is not going to make major inroads in the black vote, but Trump also knows that. Like, but what Trump and kind of Fox News gets, which is like, oh, okay, that's kind of smart. If you put like a black dude on there, or maybe some black dudes at the rallies, right? It's like, hey, look, because we support all Trump wants to do is to not have a lot of black people vote for Biden. So he's not really trying to gain a bunch of votes. Like, black people are not going to be the swinging factor to win Trump the election. Partly because in the areas where there are a lot of black people, they usually swing heavily Democratic. It wouldn't skew those numbers, you know what I'm saying? But what he does, his overall goal is he wants to limit the number of black people who would vote for Biden, because that can be a major swing factor for Biden's election. But I think one of the issues is most of the time, and I think this is partly the fact that you look at is that cabinet and the people around, they just don't have a lot of like that level of diversity to let them know like this is what you need to say to kind of help the black vote.
Mhm.
Like Biden, after he went after the election, Waffle House. You know what I'm saying? Let's think about
What
it
are you trying
logically.
to, what are you trying to say?
No,
What
this
church
is this
or
is
Waffle House?
this is 3D chess. This is 3D chess for Biden's team. They sat in a room and they said, "Hey, after the election, right? We're going to go to like a Southern staple, a black Southern staple. Not saying other races don't eat Waffle House, but we're going to go there and then eat there to show that, like, oh, he's with the people, right? And not just any people. And I think the problem is what Trump normally says is like, we've done so much for the black community. That's not really like what you say to kind of sway the black vote, right? Like, there's different bases people try to win. There's Jewish communities, there's Asian communities, black communities. There's a
Okay,
myriad.
how do you win the black? How do you win the black vote?
So one, this is like I said, this is a whole nother podcast too, but I'll give you a sample, right? Black people in generally are more like compassionate to other minority issues than most other groups, right? A lot of other social groups are very like, this is my group, this is what we're doing, right? Like protect, our group. Even if you look at things like dating, right? Like if a black person brings someone of another race home, they're like, oh, that's cool. Some other races that happens, and they're like, whoa, don't bring him in, right? So because of that, right? Some of the stuff Trump has said about, let's say, like illegal immigrants, things like that, does kind of secondhand effect not making this popular with the black community because black people are always typically pretty sympathetic to those other causes, like more so than like the average person. So it'd be tough now. It's not really enough time in this election now for him to do it. So what he is doing is right, just saying like, oh, I support the black vote and trying to decrease that swinging for Biden. But overall, and then some of it isn't. I can't even put all this on Trump. Some of it's just the recent Republican Party hasn't really been a kind of a safe space for black voters. So it's not really enough time for him. It was happening before him and it's happening now. I don't think that's something he could do in that timeline.
Yeah, and so I don't think there's a difference between the races, but there's the class. And each class is really looking at who's helping them. So at every level, you break it down, you have your large group of people, and then it gets
Mm-hmm.
broken down into higher class, middle class, lower class. Doesn't in my mind, it doesn't matter the race because what they're looking at is at each one of them, they all have their different issues that they need resolved. A lower class person generally needs help getting out of being lower class, needs food. They need the same basic living standard things. And across the board, whoever's helping them is who they're going to generally vote for or who they should vote for. And maybe that's not how it works because that's a logical thinking aspect versus sometimes it's emotional or, people are voting what their parents voted for. And then, so going with this theory, a middle class person has basic needs. Now they kind of want maybe more, maybe they want tax breaks, so now who's helping them in that sense? So this is my idea behind that. And so like going into that, a lower class person in a left leaning state may be impacted to vote more with the Republicans because of one main thing, immigration.
Mm-hmm.
The left leaning states have been giving a lot of resources that have traditionally been given to the lower class people to the immigrants who are coming over. And now the lower class people are feeling that by not having those resources or maybe not maximizing all those resources, which may force them to vote the opposite way. What do you think about that?
No, 100%. But I think this goes back to what we were saying with the
Hold on,
race. So first,
you can't say 100% but and then change.
well, that's my thing. 100%, but then it's 50%. But this goes back to what you were saying at first. So first to reference the kind of race element of it, right? One, I will push back because I've told you this before, right? When they've done studies, right? They talk about how like
Mhm.
people normally hire people that are similar to them, right?
Yeah. And
So,
you always get me with that.
what'd you say?
And you always get me with that. So then
Yeah.
I'm like,
So,
yeah, we gotta.
yeah. So if me, let's say me, for example, right? Let's say there's two candidates and they're 100% equal, and one's black and one's white. Statistically, I could there's studies that have shown that I could be biased to hire that black person if there's a tie, even if there's like a slight nuance, right? But in the real world we live in, most of the people at the top making higher decisions aren't me, right? So even if you're a poor black person, poor Asian, poor Latin, it still matters who's at the top. And if someone wants to fact check, go look at Apple CEO board, like board of executives. Look at Amazon. Pick 5 companies. You'll see a shocking lack of diversity, right? So
Yeah.
to get to those positions, those opportunities you were given, things like that. So, and don't get me wrong, there's elements that balance that kind of stuff out. That some people want more of those elements, some people want less, but it does exist. To your
Yeah.
secondary, go ahead.
And just to give you that so that you don't spin this, because I know you're trying to spin it, is that what I'm trying to say isn't that there isn't racism, there isn't racism.
You saying classism is the most important element now?
No, I don't think it's the more important element. I think it's just an element, and universally across the board, it's as you're breaking it down, you have those trees. Like I said, you have all the trees broken down, and as you're going down those trees, it's just another element. At its most basic need is all those people at that lower class, doesn't matter what race they are, need certain things. Like you can make a list, and those lists universally probably will go across the board, whether you're white, black, Asian, whatever it is. Those needs will go across the board. And you could do the same for a middle class. Now, as you go into each race, now you can rank those in a different stance. A lower class white person could also say they're being targeted for racism for not getting a job, or there's so many arguments they can say. I'm not being sympathetic towards, I'm just saying at its most basic need, a lower class person needs certain basic elements, and that's what they're going to vote towards. And now each race, now there's subdivisions of it that become more challenging.
No, it makes sense.
I'm fully aware that there's a difference between races, between all those different nuances.
No, 100%. And I want to hit on something you said, because you brought up an interesting point about immigration. And I think this gets back into the race thing we talked about, right? So it's the same as this book. A lot of people probably read it, like Art of Seduction, right? And in that giant book, one element of it was talking about, even if you're trying, a lot of it's in relevance to romance, right? But one element of it is, if you try something, like if you flatter someone, even if they know you're flattering them, it still works most of the time, right? So if someone is like, oh man, Ocasio, man, you really hit the gym on them. Even if you're like, I know they're just trying to butter me up, you're still like, well, I have been hitting the gym, right? The same as we talked about, and I'll come full circle to immigration. Same thing we talked about the black vote, right? Oh, you know who I'm going to pick as my vice president? Kamala Harris, right? The black community doesn't particularly care about Kamala Harris, but it still showed that Biden was trying. So
what happens if Trump comes out with a black VP?
It depends who the person is. Like, he can't get one of those people who pop on Fox who don't even like the black community at all, right? So it depends, but it honestly would depend. There's probably some candidates, but he'd have to find someone with some semblance of respect in the community. But think about what he did last time, right? When who was his vice president?
Mike Pence.
Mike Pence, right? Trump's not super religious, so who did he get? The most religious Republican he could find, because he wanted to pander to that base. Biden was like, oh, the black community liked me. I was under Obama. Let me get a black VP. So when you pander to a base, even if everybody knows is what you're doing, it still works on both sides. To your immigration point, right? What the Democrats have said is like, hey, you know what? Illegal immigrants, some of y'all become citizens, right? A lot of liberals really, are sensitive to the plight of, immigrants, right? So therefore, let's put some resources into that, right? So even if it is pandering, right, still, it doesn't mean it won't be successful.
So my prediction, maybe that's when you come back on the podcast again, is there's going to be, when Donald Trump announces his VP, it's going to be either a woman or a black person. That's my prediction. The reason I say that is he got how do you say the word? Angelical. He got the angelical vote.
That's a good point.
And they're in now. They're with him. They're not moving. So now the two things that he falls short on is the Stormy Daniels thing. And he needs to bring a woman in to say, hey, look, I have women I sympathize and support him, or he can get more of the black vote by. And I think what would dictate that is if the polls come around and he's starting to swing more of the black vote, he may think I don't need to have the black VP. Let me get a woman, and now I can bring the numbers up there. So that's pretty interesting. That's
No,
my
that's
prediction.
and see that level of strategy, like strategic thinking, is fascinating. I don't think he's going to go black VP because it's too risky, right?
Man,
Like if you're,
I'll
what
go.
you
I'll
said,
trump it all the way.
yeah, like it's too risky because most of the kind of black Republicans are already on the fringe of the kind of black ecosystem anyway. So you can't get one of them, and then the ones that are kind of respected aren't going to like risk their political cachet. So I think woman is your pick, and it'd probably be Nikki Haley. Like try to check a couple boxes at once. I could see, it definitely won't be like a white male, just because it won't. It like you said, he has that like vote already. Um, so yeah, no, I do agree. I agree with that. I think that's a good one.
So I'm leaning that it's going to be a. I have two people in mind. I'm not going to say who they are, but I think it's going to be the black VP is going to be the option.
Like I said, we'll see. I'll be shocked because it's like it would just be so. It would be like a TV show.
So I'm leaning more to. So I'm leaning more towards the VP being the black VP over the woman, but
that would be so crazy. I don't think he does it. Like it would just be the top story all the time. Like because one, that black VP is gonna get made so much fun of because if it's one of those like kind of hyper Republican, they're gonna go and find all these quotes they probably said before. Then they're gonna get made fun of in the black community. Then everybody's in the black community is gonna say we're not gonna vote for this dude. Like I don't see. I'll be shocked if it happens. Like I said, I'm gonna come on here. I'll say I was wrong. That's where he went. I think he's going woman, vice president.
One of the things that you said was that they're not going to take it. Like whoever would be the black person that takes the VP, right? But my argument to you is this: where does the VP's career go after? You see what I mean? If you're going to take that job, you're saying we're going to win, and I'm going to be the VP, which then would either put me on the path of one or two things: I retire, or I become the president after.
So you think it was Tim Scott? You think it's going to be Tim Scott?
You can't like just put people out there that I'm because I have bets.
It's going to be Tim. Like I said,
I think Tim Scott is one of them. I think he's a really strong candidate. There's one more, I can't remember his name right now, but there's another guy, really strong. But because the other guy, he's I have to look him up. But his main thing was two things. He speaks really well. He aligns a lot with what Donald Trump says and does. But then the big thing is he's in the.
Just a lot of them don't take part in elections, just simply because a lot of times the candidates aren't really representative of the people, value-wise and looks-wise. But I think the problem with it is, and this is something Republicans in the long term would need to get over or to find a way to fix. A lot of the black Republican people in government have a certain corniness that they've never been able to not find. Like Obama, even if someone thinks let's say somebody's a diehard Republican, they're like, I just hate Obama. If they met Obama in real life, they probably be like, oh, that guy's kind of cool. And I think if the Republican Party could create in a lab black Republicans that do have that kind of cool factor, but I just don't know if the current batch has it. And then another thing too, if I'm Kamala, I just wouldn't debate him, right? So because the whole point would be optically, right? Like, hey, look, we got a black vice president too, right? We got two. Either way, you still got a black. But the only way you really get the points from that is they see the juxtaposition. But if I'm like Biden, I'm like, oh, we're just not going to have you debate, and then just let the media cycle talk about how corny this,
Yeah, and so I think the point that I was saying was kind of what you bring out a little bit is that pastor one. I think he was a pastor. He's able to pull people out to vote versus okay, you're just another politician. Politician is a politician. You know what I mean? And so you change the skin color to still politician in my book. So it's just what it is. So let's move to the AI prediction on the. So what are your thoughts of the latest podcast I created with the AI where it predicted who would win and then its reaction to who won the debates?
So this is really interesting, right? because it gets into the future of us as humans and AI in general, right? And about how its criteria are going to be different than human criteria, right? Even though it's built for humans, right? So when you're watching a debate, you're watching like Biden age in front of us, right? You're probably like most like the consensus is logically going to be like, oh yeah, Trump won. And but then when AI is looking and it removes some of those elements, right, that are important for communication, like how confident do you sound, how healthy do you sound, right? Like biologically, when we hear weakness in voice, we're naturally like, oh, something's wrong, right? AI, right, when it's just like kind of putting stuff in transcript form and trying to grade it off those criteria, can come out with different answers to the test, right, than what a human can. So I thought it was fascinating in general to be like, oh, is this going to be the future? How is the world going to start leaning less towards feelings, right? Like, oh, this person made us feel comfortable and he felt strong and he felt weak, versus, oh, he said that we graded in this matrix. Is that going to affect who we end up with as leaders who runs companies? That I think in the macro is an interesting concept.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons is that I wanted to do that was just to see what the AI would say. And one of the challenges that I see with AI isn't the AI, but it's the inefficiency in someone using the AI.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing I didn't train it. I just wanted to see what it was going to say and what it would produce. And the results were kind of weird because it went off of what it thought Trump and Biden would do from the past debates. So there was no ability for it to understand that people can change for the environment, and they can also be trained in a way so they cannot act that same way. So all it can do is logically go through the data it has and then made a decision. And it assumed, and I believe it assumed, that Donald Trump was going to uh, trash Joe Biden and keep up with his past reputation, and he didn't do that. And I thought it assumed that Joe Biden would be a 20-year-old dirty Joe.
Mm-hmm. But see, and I think, but that still raises, and we had talked about this before, right? Winning and losing, right? So we'll say for the human, we'll put in two different buckets. Human selection of who won the debate, right? The consensus is Trump, right? We'll go with that. So lock that in. We'll put that in a box over here. But like I said, AI is not human, right? So, and the difference between what AI will do and a person do is no one watching the debate would create a matrix of categories and say, okay, whoever checks these categories wins the debate, right? Like, so because of that, to the I would venture to say, oh, well, its elements of some of its grading probably is logical for what it was programmed to do, which is like if you just printed two people a transcript of the debates, you could easily come out with Biden winning the debate, right? Some of the stuff Trump said during it, when you fact check it, isn't really accurate. Like when he said, like, "Oh, I didn't sleep with a porn star," it's like, come on, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, like,
What
so
are you trying
because of that,
to? You have to say allegedly.
allegedly, this is one of those situations where most of America doesn't care that he did. It's just funny that he has to lie about it, like allegedly, right? So
Yeah,
AI,
but you also have to understand he's at a point where he can't ever say he did.
100%, 100%. But in a debate, right? Like if you're the transcript AI reading this, the AI can like, oh, well, he said he didn't do this. Oh, but we have news articles saying that he lost a court case for this. Ding, right? Like we're taking away points for that. Like so I think what it does is it creates an environment where AI is not going to judge it the same. So it's not to me malfunction necessarily if it comes out with a different winner than what human says. It looks at things differently than we will look at it.
Yeah, it looks at things more logical. And so now you have the challenge of, because it's not going to read any emotion of how the message is delivered.
Mm-hmm.
If the ums and the uds and the freezes, because he could have froze and locked up, and the AI could be thinking that, well, the AI doesn't think, it could be coming to the conclusion that he's taking a pause.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? So there's these challenges of, can it assume if he's freezing up, if he's not? Like there's that in the assumptions of how the AI is reading it. And now that brings a point to video we created was reading the transcripts. Now, I wonder what would be the result if we posted the video to it so it could look at the video and see what that.
Yeah, no, that, and I think probably what would happen is I could imagine that skewing the results too. If it like depends on what elements it decides to like focus on, right? Um, but what, yeah, right now we live in a world where now that we're integrating AI, it's not the deciding factor of who won, right? Because, like I said, if they could run it back, Biden would not agree to the debate and Trump would. And I think that's an element to determine who really won, like how much impact did it have on the candidates. But um, I think what if I was like, if I was a, let's say if I was a Democratic, like, like someone in Biden's cabinet, I'd come out with like, hey, AI says I won. When you look at the facts, substantively, I was right. That's the angle that if I was on the Democratic side, I would try to weaponize is, hey, look, listen, we've had AI look at this. What Trump's saying was a lie. What we were saying was factual. Like, and then, like I said, if I'm on the Republican side, it's like, look, everyone knows we all saw this. He looked really old, and chalk this up for a win.
Yeah, and it was pretty interesting that it said that the AI said President Donald Trump's plans were more actionable and more of an immediate resolution to the conflicts and the issues that are going on. And President Joe Biden's policies and angles were a longer term solution. And it didn't say their policies or their angles were either wrong. And I didn't know if it was just being political. It just said that Donald Trump provided a immediate solution, whereas President Biden provided a long-term solution. But it did score Biden as winning 8-6 out of scale to 10. So I was like, wow, it was very skewed in a very wrong way. The amount of wrong, I can't even say, like, I don't even know how to bring this to a sentence. The amount of wrongness that the AI was, I have no idea how it decided it to be an 8. And I listed it into the description, so it has all the scores and how it went down each line by line and each category. So it was pretty interesting. But it was like 8.6 to like 6.3.
Yeah, that is wild. But this goes to my point. What I'm saying is the grading. If we humans, we factor stuff in that a computer doesn't care about. It doesn't care that one guy's old. Well, based off those criteria. In the future, they could change, or you could put in different criteria, right? But from what it looks at, it's just like, oh, well, this is what you said. And a lot of times throughout the debate, Trump does his kind of standard, I was the best president. I was the greatest president. You were the worst president. You were the worst president ever. Like a lot of that from a technical debate standpoint of what was actually said. Like I do feel like Biden was more substantive because like had way more substance in the sense of like, hey, we've done this, we do this, we're gonna do this in the future. And Trump kind of did his thing, which has worked. It literally made him the president, the like overpromise, right? Like, and then some of the stuff he said was true. Like there was like some job growth prior to like COVID and all those elements, and he did have to funnel money into the economy due to COVID, right? But so I think the AI was correct in saying Biden won by its criteria that it was given. Then with different criteria.
So what I heard you say is that you believe Biden won. Okay, I got you.
No, it'd be like disingenuous to be like, oh yeah, he did well during the debate. But I think from a substance perspective, I don't think even the way they communicate, like when Biden's actually being like lucid, like Biden does have more substance, but he's at an age right now where I don't think he can deliver it clearly in a way that someone wants to hear. As opposed to AI, you can say it and it puts it on paper. I think when it comes out like that, like this had been like a, hey, both candidates right out. Well, now, because then, Biden's still out. If it was like they could plug a chip into both their brains and then have a debate, then I think Biden could have won. But his age, I think, is just a limiting factor, The last interesting thing that I think we should hit on just briefly, but I think this deserves to be his whole podcast, right, is what happens now and what's AI's part in it, right? We've seen how prior to the kind of takeoff of AI obviously existed and was prevalent, but not to this extent. how much misinformation, disinformation was in the campaigns. Now, when we have completely unregulated AI virtually, right? And then a presidential campaign that in a climate that's more divided than ever. What happens next?
Yeah, and I think there's so many aspects that people may not realize. There's the misinformation, disinformation of how fast information is put out, memes are made, all these different things, right? But I think one of the things people are missing is AI is being integrated so fast into things, applications, tools, whatever you want. Everything that's being out there right now, AI is being integrated in it. And I don't think those third party systems are prepared for the AI.
Mm,
You see, and so it's not necessarily like, let's use this as an example. When you use ChatGPT, you can go into ChatGPT and it can access Canva. It can access all these micro applications inside of it. I don't know if those applications were prepared for that to happen.
mm,
You see what I mean? So now take that system. Take that system and integrate that into the systems that elections have. Now, all the tools and applications and manipulations and predictions that AI, all the tools, the systems and applications that are used for elections, I'm sure AI is being integrated into that. So now what's the secondary effect into that? And I can give you an example of that is one way to suppress a voter is to give them overconfidence. Early in the election system, what you do is you say, let's just give this scenario, Al Gore's ahead by 60 points. And so if you're halfway through the election, Al Gore's ahead 60 points. Now I could be sitting home and say, well, he's already won. I'm not going to go vote. And so this is where AI in those applications, in those pollings, in those systems could have a bigger impact that we're not really looking at.
no, when I say I think you're 100% right, I was thinking the same thing. And I think this is a risk that a lot of Republican voters are going to be facing, right? Where once the algorithm starts spinning up and it's like, oh, he's dominating. This is clear. Look how weak the other candidate is. Then all of a sudden, people, especially those communities that aren't used to voting anyway, or didn't vote in the last elections, or aren't big fans of voting, right? And they're like, oh, this is already done, right? I think that can happen on both sides. And secondarily, this reminded me yesterday I was on Reddit and somebody just posted like a fake post that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar died. And then I pride myself on not being like easily fooled, but even I had to like Google it, and I was like, oh, they got me. And I'm like, because what happens is, and especially for people who watch a lot of sports, right? Usually online, whenever like a star athlete dies, there's always this very similar, like they post a picture of them like they're close up, old age, and a picture of them young, making a layup, and then like their name and it looks, whenever you see a character die, like when Bill Walton died, they showed it. You're like, oh, your brain gets shown when you see that picture somebody died. So they put it in that exact format, and it made me say like, oh, I gotta look. And we saw this with the Russia Ukraine thing, right? With the amount of propaganda coming out. When you have Trump already kind of saying like, hey, I'm not about to have a bunch of people dying over there. I'm putting into this war, which Putin is like, yes. And then, Putin obviously does not want Biden to continue like funding the kind of Ukrainian war efforts, right? You got Russian intervention that's going to be occurring heavily on one side. Then you got like U.S. people who have access to AI for like $20 a month. Well, really free, but 20 can get you the really good one. They're going to be involved trying to swing for both sides. So I really think we're going to end up with a crazy election period.
Yeah, I think it's going to be crazy. And I think what drives the wildness and the craziness is how fast the information is going to be out there and how fast things can change. So it's going to be a faster type of an election and a faster misinformation, disinformation campaign. So it's going to be very interesting to see. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on here today. So hopefully we can do this again. I think the next topic would be on the second one you just said. So what topic did you just mention?
I think we should kind of start really parsing out this upcoming election and how AI is going to do it, because I really think that's where the helpful, like, we got to be predictive in what's about to influence, kind of the direction of the nation, because years from now, that could be something where we're like, oh, like, We wish we'd have, caught that, slow down that train before it kept going. So I think that's the topic.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. So if you want to join us again, I do want to remind everyone, like, subscribe. We're going to leave some descriptions below in the description. Like and subscribe. And don't forget to join us on the next podcast.